Hello there, wonderful human being. You've just made my day approximately 847% better by clicking on this video, and a subscription would probably break my happiness meter completely. Time to get this party started. I shot up in bed, my chest heaving, heart slamming against my ribcage. The harsh red glow of the alarm clock screamed 3:20 a.m. Cold sweat clung to my skin, another round of that same relentless dream. I stayed frozen in the dark, trying to steady my breath, careful not to disturb the sleeping form beside me. My wife shifted slightly but didn't wake, and I silently exhaled in relief. These nightmares had a way of escaping into the real world. Garbled words, clenched fists, erratic movements, and the last thing I needed was to explain away another episode of yelling in my sleep. My hand, slick with sweat, ran shakily through my damp hair. The dream never changed. I'd always find myself alone in our dimly lit living room, a drained whiskey bottle resting on the coffee table, and a loaded gun heavy in my hand. Each time I'd scream obscenities into the emptiness, rage meant for the two people who had torn my life apart. Then, with the barrel pressed to my temple, right as I was about to pull the trigger, I'd wake up gasping, drenched, the rage still pulsing through my veins. Even in full wakefulness, the fury wouldn't subside. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to erase the lingering images. Her face smeared with remorse, his face smug and satisfied. These weren't memories, they were scars. They say time heals all wounds, but whoever said that never had their life incinerated by betrayal and lies. It had been 2 years since everything unraveled. I had managed to rebuild piece by painful piece. But even now, in the dead hours of the night, the ache returned. The dreams weren't as frequent anymore. What had once haunted me weekly had dwindled to once every couple of months. Still, each one reopened a wound I thought had closed. Careful not to wake her, I slid out of bed and padded softly to the kitchen. I splashed cold water on my face, letting it sting away the remnants of the nightmare. Then I stood in the still, quiet house, letting the silence soothe me. My life now is barely recognizable from what it once was. I came through the fire. Some might even say I emerged stronger, but scars like these don't fade. And when sleep comes, so do the echoes of what happened. To understand why I still carry this weight, you have to go back to the moment when the illusion shattered, and I saw just how fragile my perfect world really was. Chapter 1: Shattered Trust. Looking back, 2023 marked the unraveling of my former life. My name is Daniel Jacobs. That year, I was 38, teaching high school history in San Diego. On the surface, things looked ideal, like something from a suburban family drama. I had been married to my wife, Rachel, for nearly 10 years. We owned a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood. Together, we had adopted 2 beautiful kids, Ethan, 8, and Sophie, 5. Our marriage had faced its challenges, but we'd always come through them together. Or so I believed. One of the hardest trials early on had been discovering I couldn't have children. After a year of trying, we saw a specialist and the diagnosis was blunt. My sperm count was virtually non-existent, medically infertile. The news hit me like a freight train. I felt like I'd failed Rachel in the most fundamental way. But she was unwavering, held me, told me it didn't change anything, that love wasn't about DNA. We turned to adoption, and when Ethan came home, followed later by Sophie, our hearts overflowed. By 2023, life felt full. We had our children, our health, and a decade of shared love. If there was still pain over not having a biological child, I assumed we'd left it in the past. But that year, subtle cracks began to appear. In 2022, Rachel made a career change, leaving the corporate world to teach 3rd grade at Sunnydale Academy. She was energized by the shift, passionate, driven, completely immersed in her new role. I was genuinely proud of her. We bonded over our shared profession, often laughing over student stories at dinner. But as the 2023 fall term progressed, I noticed changes. Rachel was putting in longer hours, returning home tired and distracted. She spoke of a demanding curriculum project and regular mentoring sessions with the school's principal, who she said had taken her under his wing as she adjusted to teaching. I didn't think much of it at the time. In fact, I admired her dedication. Still, there were moments, fleeting but strange. A few times I walked in to see her grinning at her phone, only for her to quickly hide it when she noticed me. Once I approached her from behind while she was texting, and she practically leapt out of her skin. When I gently asked if anything was wrong, She let out a light laugh and waved it off, calling me paranoid. She said she was just working on lesson plans with her coworkers. Her voice was casual, but something about her demeanor didn't sit right with me. There was a tension just beneath the surface. Still, I dismissed it. Trust is the bedrock of a solid marriage, isn't it? I had absolute faith in Rachel. We had a deep love, built over years and forged through trials. What could possibly shake that now? That comforting belief was shattered one cold November night in 2023. The memory of it is etched into me. Dinner was over, the kids were sprawled in the living room, absorbed in a cartoon. I walked into the kitchen, expecting to find Rachel cleaning up like she usually did. Instead, she was frozen in place by the sink, staring out the window into the night. "Rach, are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. Under the overhead light, I noticed a subtle trembling in her shoulders. When she turned to face me, my heart dropped. Her eyes were ringed with red, unmistakably from crying. Clutched in her hands was a small, white object I recognized immediately. It was a pregnancy test. I couldn't make sense of it at first. Why would she? She didn't wait for me to speak. She extended the test toward me, her hand shaking slightly. In the small window, 2 pink lines glowed clearly. "I'm pregnant, Dan," she said softly. For a heartbeat, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I looked from her to the test, then back again. "Pregnant," I repeated, dazed. A faint, unsteady smile crossed her lips. "I know. It's surprising," she said. "But miracles happen. The doctor always said there was a slim chance." My thoughts were spiraling. Could this actually be happening? We'd been told that my chances of fathering a child were nearly non-existent. But not impossible, a voice in my head reminded me. There was what? A 1 in 10,000 chance? Had we defied the odds? Rachel reached for my hand, stepping closer, tears now running freely down her cheeks. "Isn't it incredible?" she whispered. "After all this time, a miracle." I should have been overwhelmed with joy. There was a time I had longed for this with everything in me. But as I looked into her glistening eyes, I didn't feel elated. What I felt was a chilling sense of unease. Her face didn't reflect joy or even surprise. It was something else, something closer to panic. I slowly pulled my hand from hers. My mouth had gone dry. "How?" I asked quietly. "How far along are you?" Her mouth opened slightly. "Just a few weeks. I only took the test today," she replied. That hit me like a thunderclap. We hadn't been intimate in over a month. Even as I tried to do the math, my stomach sank. The dates didn't line up, but I shoved that thought down and forced a smile, one that I could feel straining against my face. "This is amazing," I said, stepping forward to wrap her in a hug. My heart pounded against my chest. I could feel the tension release from her body as she melted into the embrace. Then came the sobs, raw and unrestrained. "Oh God, thank you," she wept, clutching at me. "I was so scared you'd be angry." I stroked her back, my fingers trembling. "Angry? Why would I be angry?" I murmured. On the surface, I sounded calm, even comforting. Inside, I was unraveling. Why would I be angry? Unless there was reason to question whether the child was mine. She pulled away slightly, searching my face with a nervous, almost pleading look. I summoned all my composure, pushing suspicion down beneath a mask of concern. "We should set up a doctor's appointment, yeah?" I suggested. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, tomorrow. I'll call first thing, see if they can fit me in." Her urgent desire for immediate confirmation didn't ease my growing fear. If anything, it deepened it. That was the end of the conversation. Rachel forced a shaky smile through her tears and left to tuck the kids in for the night. I stayed behind, motionless in the kitchen, fists clenched on the countertop as thoughts slammed into me from every direction. The guilt of even entertaining the idea clawed at me. Rachel had stood by me through everything. I had trusted her without question. To even consider that she might be hiding something this devastating, felt like I was the one betraying her. But the signs were there. Mounting. Relentless. Once my heartbeat steadied and my breath returned, I reached for the trash can. Beneath used napkins and discarded food wrappers, I found what I dreaded, a crushed pregnancy test box, and beneath that, a receipt, dated 2 days earlier from a nearby pharmacy. The list: one pregnancy test and a bottle of prenatal vitamins. My stomach dropped. She'd bought prenatal pills before ever mentioning she might be pregnant. She must have suspected days ago, and she had already taken steps, already treating it as real. Why keep it from me? Unless she was scared. Unless someone else had already been told, the one who was truly the father. A wave of nausea overtook me. I almost lost it right there on the tile floor. But through the horror, a brutal kind of clarity took hold. The pieces, late hours, private messages, the supportive boss she never stopped mentioning, a pregnancy we never thought possible, clicked together with sickening finality. Could this so-called miracle actually be proof of betrayal? I didn't want to believe it. This was Rachel, my wife, my partner. The idea that she could do something like this was unimaginable. But deep down, I felt the truth rooting itself inside me. I didn't confront her, not then. Instead, I lay next to her that night, stiff and sleepless, while she dozed peacefully, either convinced her secret was buried deep or praying it was. My mind churned with turmoil. Accusations meant nothing without proof. If I was right, if the worst had happened, I needed more than rage. I needed a plan. By the time I finally left our home and parked a few blocks away in silence, the weight of it all crashed down. Only then, alone in the dark interior of my car, did I let go. I screamed until my throat burned. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel until my fingers throbbed and my skin was raw. Something inside me cracked. The man who eventually stepped through the front door at dawn was not the man who had woken up beside his wife the morning before. As sunlight bled over the horizon, I began constructing the skeleton of a plane, cold, precise, powered by a fury I'd never known was in me. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning. That morning, with my heart hammering in my chest, I drove to Sunnydale Academy. I told myself I was just dropping off lunch for Rachel. The truth? I needed to see him, face to face. I already had a strong, gut-wrenching suspicion who the father was. Andrew Turner, her boss. I caught him before the first bell, in a hallway lined with lockers and student projects. He offered a polite smile, the kind reserved for parents and strangers, but behind his eyes, there was something else. Recognition, unease. We exchanged a few surface-level pleasantries, words I don't even remember. Inside, my anger coiled tighter. Up close, he looked so ordinary, friendly even. It made me hate him more. He had no idea I knew. I kept it that way. But then Rachel appeared, rounding the corner just as I walked away from him. For the briefest second, her face twisted in sheer panic. She saw us together. And in that moment, I knew. That evening, when the house had quieted and the kids were asleep, I confronted her. We stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd first discovered the truth, and I asked, my voice low and steady, "How long?" She didn't ask what I meant. Her eyes widened, then the tears came. A strange look passed over her, some twisted combination of grief and relief. "Since the summer," she whispered, sinking into a chair as though her legs couldn't hold her. I never meant for it to happen. After the workshops, we got close. He was supportive. I felt alone. It just happened. "Just happened?" I repeated, bitterness sharpening each word. "What, you tripped and landed on him?" She flinched, but kept going. Tears streaming, words pouring out like a confession she'd been rehearsing in her mind for months. "It wasn't often. I swear, I told him it was wrong. I tried to stop." "Not hard enough," I said, my fists so tight my fingernails were cutting into my palms. She buried her face in her hands. "I thought he cared." "I thought you didn't. I see now how wrong I was. I let him take advantage of the way I was feeling, of me." I nearly laughed at the attempt to spread the blame. "So now it's his fault?" "No, yes, I mean, it's both of us. I'm not making excuses, Dan. I'm sorry, I am so sorry. I've ruined everything, haven't I?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My jaw locked shut as the weight of her words settled between us, like smoke in a house already burning. She slipped off the chair and reached toward me, but I pulled my hand away. "Don't," I said, my voice like frost. "Why, Rachel?" Why the pregnancy? Were you planning to pretend it was mine? She shook her head in a frenzy. I don't know. I panicked. When I found out, I hoped. A part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of miracle, that maybe you'd accept it, and we could raise the baby and leave everything else behind. A sharp, empty laugh cut from my throat. Forget? You thought I wouldn't notice that the baby couldn't possibly be mine? She was unraveling, rocking back and forth on the floor, her words tumbling out. I wasn't thinking. I was terrified. I didn't want to lose you. I love you, Dan. I swear I do. He meant nothing. It was a meaningless, stupid fling. Stupid, I echoed softly, the fury within me burning cold. The stupidest decision you've ever made. And the biggest mistake I ever made was trusting you. That was the moment she shattered. She collapsed into a fit of desperate apologies, sobbing so hard her voice fractured with every word. But no apology could undo what she'd done. My voice, flat, low, almost unrecognizable, delivered the only truth that mattered. Our marriage is finished. There was no screaming, just the finality of quiet devastation. Rachel crumpled to the tile, wailing uncontrollably, pleading for another chance over and over. I turned away from her and locked myself in the guest room, her cries trailing behind me like smoke. That night, I barely closed my eyes. But I didn't need more time to decide. Rachel and I were over. And Andrew Turner? He'd be made to pay for what he had done. Neither of them would walk away unscathed. Not after tearing apart my family. Chapter 2. Assembling the Case. I didn't let sorrow or rage consume me. In the days that followed Rachel's confession, I poured my focus into two goals: keeping my kids safe and taking apart the lives of the people who betrayed me. My first step was to quietly consult a divorce attorney. I needed clarity, what my rights were, how to protect myself. California may be a no-fault state, but the lawyer assured me that clear evidence of cheating could still shift the balance in custody and settlement negotiations. That was all I needed to hear. I began collecting proof. Rachel's phone logs were a goldmine, dozens of calls and messages to a number I recognized instantly: Andrew Turner's. The timestamps hit like punches. Late nights, weekends when I was out with the kids. Each one confirmed what I already knew in my gut. I went through our credit card statements and found damning patterns. A hotel reservation the same night I was away at a teaching conference. Meals charged near her school on days she claimed to be working late. Bit by bit, the scope of their betrayal came into stark relief. And with every piece I added to my growing file, my resolve only deepened. I wasn't interested in drama. I wanted precision. Revenge, for me, meant being meticulous, thorough, and leaving no exits. Rachel was only half the equation. Andrew Turner needed to feel it too, and that's when I realized I had a potential ally. His wife, Monica Turner. We'd met briefly at school events. A gracious woman with a soft smile who'd spoken fondly of her husband while we sipped fruit punch at a fundraiser. Knowing now that she'd likely been living in the same nightmare made me feel a bitter sense of connection. She had a right to the truth. And selfishly, I knew that if I involved her, it would only intensify the fallout for Andrew and make it harder for him to paint himself as the victim. There's no fury like two betrayed spouses united. It wasn't hard to track Monica down. A quick online search revealed her cell number. We'd once both been part of a PTA email chain. The hard part was convincing myself to call. 2 days after confronting Rachel, I sat alone in my living room, the house still except for the hum of silence. Upstairs, the kids slept soundly, blissfully unaware that everything was about to change. I stared at Monica's number on my phone, thumb poised to press. How do you tell a stranger that her husband got your wife pregnant? Eventually, I decided it was better to be direct. I sent a short, clear message. Hi, Monica. This is Dan. I'm sorry to bring this to you, but I have reason to believe your husband Andrew and my wife Rachel have been having an affair. I'd like to share what I've found if you're open to talking. I included my number and hit send. Her response came quicker than I ever expected. The phone rang not even a minute later. Her voice shook. This is Monica. I got your message. Please, tell me everything. That conversation was one of the most raw, emotionally charged moments of my life. At first, Monica clung to denial, her voice thick with panic and a desperate wish that I'd misunderstood something. But as I gently walked her through the facts, Rachel's pregnancy, her confession, the timing, I heard the air catch in her throat. Then, the sobs came. Between ragged breaths, she shared her own story. She'd suspected something for a while. Andrew had become increasingly withdrawn, his absences explained by vague late nights and unannounced trips. At one point, she confronted him directly, asking if he was involved with someone else. He denied it with wounded pride, insisting it was just the pressure at work. "He looked me in the eye and lied," she said, her voice sharp with resentment. I could practically hear her jaw tighten through the phone. "He lied to both of us," I replied, trying not to let my voice crack. "At least now we finally know." Monica bombarded me with questions. How I'd brought it up with Rachel, what was said, how long it had been happening. I answered every inquiry as truthfully as I could manage. One of her questions caught me off guard, strange in its phrasing. When we finished sharing everything, there was a long, heavy silence on her end. Then I spoke carefully. "Monica, I want to suggest something, but I'll understand completely if you're not okay with it." She sniffled quietly. "Go ahead." "I think they need to face the fallout, both of them. I'm not built for forgiveness in this kind of situation." My voice came out harder than I intended, but she didn't flinch. "I feel the same," she replied softly. The numbness in her voice was gone, replaced now by simmering fury. I inhaled deeply. "I think we should join forces. Coordinate how we confront them, either publicly or legally. Catch them off guard. Make sure they can't manipulate the story or turn us against one another." A faint, dry laugh came through the phone. "Team up, huh?" The irony is not lost on me. Despite myself, I gave a slight, grim smile. These are strange times. Strange alliances make sense. Her voice grew stronger. "All right, I'm with you. What's the plan?" And that's how we began to construct our revenge. We decided the most effective moment to expose them would be in a setting where they'd feel comfortable and seen. Fortunately, the Academy's annual winter party was coming up in just a week. Held on a Friday evening at a local banquet venue, the event always attracted a mix of staff and spouses. Andrew and Rachel were both sure to attend and likely sneak away to spend time together. If we could catch them there, it would be undeniable and unforgettable. To prepare, I made sure Rachel believed I was truly out of town that weekend. I told her I was taking the kids to visit my parents, leaving Friday afternoon and staying until Sunday. I hinted that I needed time to reflect, and the children could use a bit of normalcy with their grandparents. She didn't argue. Lately, she'd been treating me with tiptoeing guilt, and while I could see sorrow in her eyes when I left, there was something else too, perhaps a glimmer of relief. Maybe she thought she'd have time with Andrew while I was away. The thought made me nauseous, but it meant the deception was working. Monica was equally methodical in her part. She informed Andrew, in her usual calm tone, that she and their kids were going to her sister's for a girls' weekend. He hardly questioned her, probably happy for the extra freedom. We were certain he and Rachel would attempt to meet either during or right after the faculty gathering. Our aim was to corner them, catch them red-handed, and expose the truth under a spotlight. That Friday arrived. Before leaving with the children, I discreetly planted a voice recorder in the living room and another in the bedroom, both set to record the entire evening. It might have been excessive, but I wasn't willing to leave any stone unturned. By 8 p.m., I was parked 2 blocks from the banquet hall where the celebration was already in full swing. The kids were safely dropped off with my mother, and a friend I trusted agreed to stay with them overnight. My mom had given me a look that said she knew I wasn't telling the whole story. Monica sat in the passenger seat beside me, her face pale but resolved. In the back, beneath a folded blanket, were the essentials, a compact video camera and a backup phone for capturing stills. We'd agreed to move in around 9:30, when the crowd would be buzzing, the drinks flowing, and their guard down. That was the window we'd been waiting for, when their guard would be at its lowest. The plan: I'd go in first, scanning the room until I spotted them. Monica would remain out of view, ready to make her entrance only when the time was right. At exactly 9:15, I received a message from one of Rachel's co-workers, a woman still in the dark about the truth, but kind enough to do me a small favor. "They're here," it read, meaning Rachel and Andrew had arrived. "Time to begin." Monica gave me a firm, silent nod. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding like a drum line. I slipped into the hotel ballroom, trying to blend in among the crowd of chatting educators and clinking wine glasses. It didn't take long to find them. Near a large, overly decorated Christmas tree, I spotted Rachel in an emerald green dress beside Andrew, who was wearing a dark gray suit. They stood slightly away from the other guests, deep in conversation. I watched as he grazed her arm, fingertips barely touching her elbow. She darted a glance around, clearly anxious, as if worried someone might witness the quiet intimacy. Neither of them had any clue that the real danger had just walked in. Then I saw him, Mr. Nguyen, the assistant principal, by the bar. Perfect. I drifted over and struck up light conversation, all the while keeping tabs on the pair near the tree. Nguyen greeted me with familiarity. We'd seen each other at district meetings before. Over his shoulder, I noticed Andrew pass something to Rachel, a small card. Likely a room key. She gave a tiny nod in reply. They were making arrangements, probably for a rendezvous once the party ended. Not if I had anything to say about it. By 9:30, I had positioned myself near the corridor leading to the hotel's meeting rooms, exactly the sort of place they'd sneak off to. Right on cue, Andrew politely slipped away from a conversation and headed in that direction. Moments later, Rachel followed, abandoning her wine glass on a table as she went. I signaled Monica, who had entered by then and was lurking just outside the ballroom. My pulse hammered as we moved after Rachel, following the swish of her green dress into a side room that looked unoccupied and dimly lit. In one hand, I held a camera already filming. In the other, my phone was ready to capture still images. My mouth was dry, every nerve on fire. This was it. Without hesitation, I shoved the door open. The scene before us confirmed every suspicion. Andrew had his arms wrapped around Rachel, lips pressed hard against hers. They jolted apart as the door slammed into the wall. "What the hell?" Andrew gasped, wiping his mouth and staring in disbelief when he saw it was me. Rachel froze, hands flying to her face. "Dan." A strange calm came over me. I turned the video camera toward them, the red recording light blinking like an accusation. "Smile," I said flatly. "You're on camera." Rachel looked like she might collapse, her face a mix of panic and shame. Andrew lunged forward as if to snatch the device from my hands. "You bastard!" Before he could finish the sentence, another voice sliced through the air like a knife. "Take one more step toward him, Andrew, and I swear you'll regret it." Monica had entered, her expression as cold and sharp as steel. I saw the blood drain from Andrew's face. "Monica?" he whispered. "Mon?" Rachel backed away until her legs hit the table, her entire body trembling. "Oh my God." Monica's eyes didn't leave her husband. "Surprised?" she said. The word sounded venomous. Andrew tried to form words, but none came out. His hands hovered uselessly in the air. I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, desperate for something, anything to say. Rachel collapsed into a nearby chair, her sobs soft but unmistakable. "Time to take control." Calmly, I reached inside my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. With a flick of my wrist, I scattered its contents. Photocopies of phone logs, hotel receipts, and other irrefutable proof. They fluttered through the air like a blizzard of guilt, landing around the guilty pair. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Ms. Lopez, one of Rachel's colleagues, raise her phone, capturing a photo or maybe even a video of the scene. Others had gathered at the doorway, frozen in place, watching with wide eyes and slack jaws as the drama unfolded live in front of them. "For anyone in doubt," I announced, voice trembling with fury, "here's your evidence. Your beloved principal has been sleeping with my wife." A wave of gasps and whispered reactions rippled through the growing crowd. Mr. Nguyen pushed through to the front, his face a portrait of disbelief and anger. "Dan, let's take this somewhere private," he said, voice low, hands raised like he was trying to calm a volatile situation. I didn't move. My focus stayed locked on Andrew and Rachel. Andrew had managed to gather some semblance of self-control, making a half-hearted effort to adjust his suit jacket. It was a pitiful gesture, as though trying to salvage dignity from the wreckage. "This is a personal issue," he snapped, defaulting to authority like a reflex. But his voice faltered, betraying his lack of conviction. "Personal?" Monica repeated, her tone slicing through his like a knife. "You made it everyone's business the moment you started an affair with a married subordinate, right in front of an entire community that trusted you." She stepped in closer and with a single, fluid motion, slipped her wedding ring from her finger. The room fell into a shocked hush as she hurled it at his chest. The ring clattered to the ground, spinning once before disappearing under the table. Her voice quivered, brimming with fury. "It's over, Andrew. I'll see you in court." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Andrew's complexion drained to pale before flushing a furious red, his features contorted by a mix of rage and shame. He tried to speak, but no sound escaped his lips. I took a step toward Rachel. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her shoulders were hunched, racked by sobs. "Look at me," I said, my voice sharp. When she finally raised her gaze, her expression was devastation incarnate. I felt a stab of something. Grief? Pity? But it quickly hardened. "This is it, huh?" I said coldly. "All you have is sorry?" She nodded rapidly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Dan." I cut her off and turned to Nguyen and the others. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover this." My chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. I'd said everything I needed to. It was finished. Nguyen stepped into the room fully now, placing a firm hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Mr. Turner." "Rachel, my office, now." His voice was quiet but seething with fury. Whatever sympathy he might have held was buried beneath professional disgust. Andrew lowered his head, broken. Rachel wobbled slightly as she stood, eyes fixed on the floor. I had nothing more to offer either of them. Not anger, not sympathy, not even words. I turned and walked away. Monica was already by the door, her face a mask of pain barely restrained by satisfaction. Together we exited the room, passing through a corridor of shocked co-workers and stunned silence. As we walked away, hushed voices began to rise behind us. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, did you see that?" Another murmured, "I knew something wasn't right." The gossip wheel had begun to spin, and by morning, their scandal would be the only thing anyone in Sunnydale could talk about. Outside, the cold night air felt still and sharp. I found Monica just outside the entrance, leaning against a pillar, hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. We stared at one another for a moment, speechless. Then the adrenaline that had carried me collapsed. My hands started to shake. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Are you okay?" I asked hoarsely. Monica gave a broken chuckle, brushing a tear off her cheek. "No, but I will be." Without thinking, I opened my arms. She stepped into them, and we held each other, our pain and anger folding together in that embrace. She wept quietly against my shoulder as I clung to her. We stood like that for a long moment, two wounded souls trying to stay upright beneath a cold night sky. Eventually, Monica pulled away and wiped her face. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I managed a faint, grim smile. "Now we begin again," I said. "We help each other pick up the pieces." She nodded, something solid and resolute flickering in her tear-stained expression. We parted a short while later, exchanging one final look before heading off into the night, each walking alone but no longer entirely broken. In that shared glance, something unspoken passed between us. We had been shattered, but we would not stay that way. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. In the days and weeks that followed that explosive confrontation, I pressed forward, determined and focused. Before sunrise the next morning, I returned to my parents' house. I slipped quietly into the room where my children slept, kneeling beside their beds to reassure myself that something in my life remained whole. Watching Ethan and Sophie sleep peacefully, I vowed then and there that I would rebuild. Not just survive, but create something sturdier than what had come before. True to that vow, I initiated divorce proceedings immediately. Rachel didn't fight it. Maybe she knew resistance was pointless. Maybe the weight of her guilt simply left her too drained to argue. Within a few months, it was over. My lawyer, armed with clear evidence of her infidelity, negotiated strongly on my behalf. I was granted primary custody of the children and sole ownership of our home. Rachel, with nothing to stand on, agreed to terms that heavily favored me. We disentangled our finances and she relinquished any claim to spousal support, most likely too ashamed to even ask. We had one final encounter, a brief impersonal meeting during divorce mediation. The woman sitting across from me barely resembled the self-assured partner I had once shared my life with. Her gaze stayed fixed on the table, her voice reduced to a quiet, flat murmur as she responded to questions. When my lawyer slid the finalized custody papers toward her, documents that placed primary guardianship in my hands, Rachel accepted them without the slightest objection. She offered a barely audible, tearful "I'm sorry," eyes glassy with unspoken regret. I said nothing in return. There was simply nothing left worth saying. Though the legalities took time, she had already left our home by then. Her departure had been silent but complete. For a while, she lived in a modest apartment on the other side of the city, trying to preserve some kind of connection with the kids. But the weight of judgment from neighbors, co-workers, and mutual friends soon made that impossible. Word spread, as it always does, quietly at first, then relentlessly. The cherished educator who had entangled herself with her superior. Even in a large city like San Diego, the grapevine behaves like it's from a town of a few hundred. The murmurs followed her down every hallway. Unable to endure the disapproval and side glances, Rachel stepped down from her teaching job before the administration could formally act against her. A long-term substitute took over her classroom, and the interim principal, who had replaced Andrew after his own exit, processed her resignation with a visible lack of sympathy. It wasn't long before she left the city altogether. She relocated to Arizona to be near her older sister, chasing a new beginning far from the smirks and speculation. I felt a quiet relief when she left. It spared our children the confusion of navigating two nearby households and the awkward tension of unexpected run-ins with their mother. Instead, her presence became occasional, a weekend visit every couple of months. She would come into town, spend a couple of days, and then vanish again. Eventually, even those visits became rare. I suspect the emotional toll, witnessing Ethan's cold demeanor or Sophie breaking down in tears at the end of a visit, became too heavy for her. Explaining the separation to Ethan and Sophie remains one of the most gut-wrenching conversations I've ever had. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I sat them down to gently share the truth, that their mom and I would be living apart, and none of it was their fault. Sophie, too young to understand the full weight of it, broke into sobs and latched onto my leg, pleading, "Does Mommy not love us anymore?" Ethan didn't cry. He fell into a thoughtful silence, then asked with painful clarity, "Did Mom do something wrong?" I fumbled for an answer, finally settling on, "She made a big mistake and it hurt our family." Even at 8 years old, he grasped more than I expected. His face tightened, and he fought back tears, his little frame stiff with a mix of sorrow and rage no child should ever have to endure. We sat huddled on the couch that day, the three of us, crying together, each of us processing in our own way. In the early weeks, they asked constantly where she was, when she'd return. I did my best to soften the truth with comforting half-truths, that their mom loved them dearly, but had to live elsewhere for now. But kids know. They can feel the cracks in their world, even if they don't yet have the language to name them. Ethan, especially, grew volatile. Anger and grief surfaced often, and not always gently. Therapy helped. So did the unwavering support from my parents and the structure I tried hard to maintain. Eventually, the questions faded. By the time the first year passed, our children seemed to accept the new reality. It was the three of us now. As for Andrew Turner, his unraveling was both rapid and deserved. Under mounting pressure from the district, he stepped down as principal. The school board released a vague statement citing personal misconduct, but within the school community, the real story needed no clarification. His professional reputation was beyond salvaging. No school would risk putting him in charge again. His personal life didn't survive either. True to her word, Monica filed for divorce. Unlike me, she had no inclination toward reconciliation. She hired a top-tier attorney and went for the jugular. From what I've heard, Andrew walked away with little more than the clothes on his back, losing the house, savings, and even part of his retirement. Monica won custody of their 2 kids. From what I understand, they want little to do with their father now. Teenagers don't easily forgive betrayal, and in this case, they fully understood the breach. Their son reportedly refuses all contact. Their daughter only visits under supervised arrangements. Within a year, Andrew lost his job, his marriage, daily contact with his children, and the majority of his financial stability. I'd be lying if I said that didn't bring me a cold sense of justice. Normally, I don't take pleasure in someone else's downfall, but for him, I made an exception. He earned every consequence. Letting go of the resentment wasn't easy. In those early months, it clung to me like a second skin. I would find myself consumed with rage at odd moments, reliving arguments, imagining revenge I thankfully never acted on. But as time moved forward, so did I. That poison inside began to fade, slowly, steadily, until one day I noticed it was gone. The sound of my children's laughter began to muffle the noise in my head. Tiny fragments of calm started taking the place of the angry scenes I had replayed for months. I came to understand that forgiveness wasn't required, not for what Rachel and Andrew had done. Maybe I'd never reach that point, but what I did need was to let go of the mental loop I'd been trapped in. For my own well-being and for the sake of my kids, I made the decision to look forward instead of constantly reliving the past. The rage that once burned like an inferno inside me began to quiet into smoldering ashes. Revenge no longer filled my thoughts as I drifted off to sleep. That chapter had already closed. Now, sleep came after helping with math homework, making sandwiches, and sharing bedtime stories. And with it came an unexpected sense of peace, the quiet pride of simply enduring. When the anniversary of what I bitterly referred to as D-Day came around, a full year since the truth had detonated my life, I found myself more settled than I'd imagined possible. The dreams that used to shake me in the night began to disappear. I could move through whole days without thinking of them at all, and sometimes when I caught my reflection, I barely recognized the man staring back. He looked familiar, but there was a new steeliness behind the eyes, a mark left by the storm I'd weathered. I had been pushed to my breaking point, but I never broke. If anything, I emerged stronger. Life began unfolding in quiet, unexpected ways. For that first year, love wasn't something I allowed myself to consider. My focus was narrow, the kids, and holding myself together. But life, in its strange and generous way, had other plans. People stepped in, some from close by, others from long ago. Neighbors brought over warm meals and coworkers invited me out, gently nudging me to remember that I existed beyond my heartbreak. Slowly, I ventured out. I let myself laugh again. Not as part of Dan and Rachel, just Dan. Then there was Monica. In the chaos that followed the unraveling of our marriages, we kept sporadic contact. At first, it was purely logistical. Texts exchanged about court dates, updates on settlements. She let me know when her divorce became final. I did the same. Oddly, there was comfort in our connection. She was the only one who really knew the depth of what I had gone through. We'd both faced the same heartbreak from different sides of the same wound. We didn't force anything. We moved cautiously. Two people who'd been gutted by betrayal, unsure if they'd ever trust love again. But time worked quietly on us. What began as friendly updates slowly shifted into shared evenings and thoughtful talks. I remember the first time she kissed me. On my front porch, after she dropped off cookies her daughter had baked for my kids. It was soft, unsure, and perfectly timed. From there, we let each other in, inch by inch. About 6 months after our lives had both imploded, Monica and I met for coffee. It was supposed to be a quick catch-up between two people still navigating emotional wreckage. Instead, we sat for 2 hours talking without pause. We spoke about our children, our uncertain plans, and the weirdness of dating again in our late 30s. We laughed, we got a little teary. When we finally said goodbye, I felt lighter, like something inside had shifted. We made it a habit. Now and then, we'd meet just to talk and check in. No pressure, no expectations. At the time, it didn't feel like something to analyze too deeply. It just felt good to not be alone anymore. What I couldn't have known then was that those simple conversations were the beginning of something we both thought we'd never find again. Joy, and maybe, if we dared to believe it, the early glimmers of new love. Epilogue. 2 years later, sunlight streamed softly through the curtains as I slowly woke. I lay there for a moment, still and quiet, marveling at how drastically my life had changed. Gone were the mornings of dread of waking to loneliness or fear. Now there was warmth beside me. Peace, love. I turned to see Monica lying next to me, her breathing slow, her lips curled in a faint smile. She looked serene in sleep. My wife, the word still felt new, remarkable even. As I moved, her hand reached out instinctively, finding mine without thought. Even in dreams, we leaned toward each other. I reached over and gently brushed a few strands of her hair from her face. And in that simple motion, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be lying here like this, with this remarkable woman whose pain had once mirrored my own, now stitched into my life, I would have laughed or cried or both. But here we were. Monica and I had found each other in the rubble. What started as shared sorrow became trust, then laughter, and eventually something rich and deep and real. We moved slowly, guarded by past scars. But love, when it's ready, has a way of slipping through the cracks. What began as cautious friendship turned into something undeniable. Our earliest dates were little more than watching our kids play at the park or talking for hours over coffee. We didn't leap, we stepped, carefully, together, until we realized we weren't falling alone. We were falling with someone willing to catch us. There was no grand revelation, no sudden certainty, just a steady build of trust, kindness, and mutual understanding. I'll never forget our first real dinner date. A quiet restaurant by the sea, nerves buzzing like we were teenagers again. We fumbled, we laughed. But by the time dessert arrived, we both knew something beautiful was beginning to bloom. And even fate, it seemed, wanted us to have this chance, with a little help from our children. Just a few days ago, I overheard Sophie chatting with a classmate, proudly saying she has 2 moms now, one who lives far away, and Miss Monica, who lives with us and makes the fluffiest pancakes ever. The words caught me off guard, and I felt my eyes sting with grateful tears. 6 months back, Monica and I tied the knot quietly at the courthouse. Ethan stood proudly by my side as my best man, while Monica's daughter scattered flower petals down the aisle. It was small, intimate, and everything we needed. These days, I wake each morning with her beside me, and I can honestly say, life is good. The house is rarely quiet. It's a whirlwind of laughter, chatter, the occasional eye roll or grumble from a teenager, but every room hums with life. Together, we've built something new from the wreckage of our pasts, and it's stronger, fuller than I ever imagined. Ethan and Sophie have embraced Monica completely. Watching her snuggled up reading Sophie bedtime stories or yelling encouragement from the sidelines at Ethan's soccer matches, I see the fierce, genuine love of a mother in her eyes. I couldn't have wished for a better person to help shepherd them through life. Her children, too, have gradually welcomed me into their hearts. Her son was cautious at first, understandably protective of his mom. But over time, he saw I wasn't there to take anyone's place, only to support, care, and be another steady presence in their lives. Her daughter, still young and looking for something constant, accepted me almost right away. Now she instinctively reaches for my hand on our ice cream outings, like it's always been that way. We all know this isn't your typical family story. Every now and then, when the kids are distracted and the house falls into a rare hush, Monica catches my eye and says, "Thank God for that horrible day." And I know exactly what she means. If we hadn't both experienced such deep betrayal, our paths would never have crossed. From something toxic, we created a kind of healing, an antidote to what we'd endured. It didn't come easy, but it saved us. This morning, I leaned over and gently kissed Monica's forehead. She sighed softly, eyes fluttering open. Those familiar brown eyes that first met mine across a coffee shop table, both of us carrying more pain than we knew how to speak. "Good morning, handsome," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. She nestled closer, her arm slipping around my chest. That simple, tender act still stirs something in me. "Good morning, beautiful," I whispered back, meaning every word. I brushed my lips against the wedding ring on her finger, something I do without even thinking, as though to remind myself this is real. She followed my gaze and smiled warmly. "You know," she said, "you don't have to keep checking. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," I replied, returning her smile. "But old habits die hard." Her look softened. "They do," she agreed. "But we've made some pretty amazing new ones, haven't we?" Before I could answer, a loud stampede of feet echoed down the hallway. A blend of young voices, some still high, others already cracking with adolescence, rang out. "Dad? Mom, you up?" That was Ethan, always the first to speak. "It's pancake day!" Sophie's voice chimed in, full of excitement. Our Saturday pancake mornings, a leftover tradition from my past, have become a treasured part of our new routine. Monica and I exchanged amused glances. "5 more minutes," she called, trying to sound stern. A theatrical groan came from the hallway. "Hurry up, we're starving," her son added, his tone full of mock urgency. "We're coming," I called back, chuckling. Satisfied, the sound of bickering and laughter faded as they raced off toward the kitchen, already debating over chocolate chips or blueberries. Monica propped herself on one elbow and looked down at me, her eyes gleaming. "Our little circus is waiting," she said. "Can you believe this is really our life?" I reached up to stroke her cheek. "Sometimes it feels like a dream," I admitted. "There was a time I thought I'd never laugh like this again." "And now," she said, smiling, "you've got a house full of chaos, sticky floors, loud kids, and a woman who loves you more than she can say." That familiar warmth bloomed in my chest again. "I wouldn't trade it for the world," I said softly. We shared a kiss, gentle and lingering, before pulling back the blankets and bracing ourselves for the joyful madness ahead. Hand in hand, we left the bedroom, and I took a mental snapshot of the moment. Sunlight washing over our cozy room, Monica by my side, and the sound of our children's laughter drifting up from below. It was a testament to a life reclaimed, a life earned through struggle and cherished deeply. Treachery had once brought me to the edge, but as I stood here now, a quiet clarity settled over me. Sometimes the most painful conclusions are simply the doorway to something unexpectedly beautiful. I walked away from a marriage built on deception, only to discover a relationship rooted in honesty and genuine mutual regard. I had weathered nights darker than I ever imagined, and they had carried me to a dawn I thought I'd never see. Monica's fingers laced through mine, and I returned the touch with a quiet squeeze. No, I wouldn't undo any part of this journey. "Dan," she said softly, pausing at the threshold to look up at me with a warm smile. "I love you. I love you too," I answered, each word resonating with absolute truth. Then, together, we stepped into the light of a new day, ready to meet whatever lay ahead, grateful, whole, triumphant.